June 7, 1944. H plus 24 hours. Omaha Beach. The real battle for Private John Miller's life didn't begin when the German machine gunner's bullet tore through his thigh. It began an hour later, in the overwhelmed aid station just beyond the dunes, with a single speck of French soil. You can almost feel the air in that tent. It's thick with a metallic tang of blood, the sting of iodine, and something else, the smell of fear. The surgeons, their hands and arms stained crimson, move with frantic, exhausted precision. They are saving lives by the dozen, but they are fighting a war on two fronts. The first enemy is visible. It's the shrapnel, the bullets, the brutal, mangling trauma of a modern war. But the second enemy is invisible. It's silent, and it is far more lethal. It's in the mud of the Norman fields. It's on the splintered wood of the landing craft. It's in the very fabric of the uniforms. It's bacteria, Clostridium staphylococcus, ancient killers that have stalked battlefields since the first armies clashed with bronze swords. For Private Miller, the surgery is a success. The bullet is removed. The wound is cleaned and dressed. He's given a shot of morphine and laid on a stretcher alongside hundreds of other young men, a mosaic of bandages and blood-soaked blankets. He is one of the lucky ones, or so it seems. But the doctors know the grim statistics. They've seen it in North Africa. They've seen it in Italy. For every man they save on the operating table, another is at risk of being lost days later, not to the enemy, but to the raging infection, the gas gangrene, the sepsis that will turn a simple wound into a death sentence. The fever begins as a shiver. Then comes the sweat, the delirium, the telltale blackening of the flesh around the wound. And then nothing. There was a miracle, of course, a wonder drug, a blue-green mold that had been transformed into a golden powder, capable of stopping these invisible killers in their tracks. Penicillin. It was the single greatest medical discovery of the century, a weapon more powerful than any tank or bomber. But there was a problem, a devastating one. Back in the sprawling factories of the United States and Britain, scientists were working around the clock, but they couldn't produce it fast enough. The demand was astronomical. Every theater of war, from the Pacific to Italy to the skies over Germany, was screaming for it. The precious vials that did make it to Normandy were rationed with an almost religious reverence, reserved only for the most hopeless cases. For the thousands upon thousands of men with survivable wounds like Private Miller, there simply wasn't enough. It was a brutal, heartbreaking triage. They could put a man on a landing craft and ship him back to a fully supplied hospital in England, but the journey took time. Time the infection didn't care about. Time the bacteria used to multiply, to spread, to conquer. Men were dying during the wait. They were losing limbs during the wait. The logistics of war were being defeated by the biology of a microbe. As the Allied forces pushed deeper into France, the supply line stretched, and the problem became a crisis. The doctors and medics on the ground, witnessing this tragic, preventable loss of life, were consumed by a single desperate question. How do we get more penicillin to the front? Right now. One man, a brilliant pathologist and bacteriologist with the U.S. Army 2nd Medical Laboratory, Major Andrew J. Fleischer, looked at the carnage, looked at the dwindling supply of the golden powder, and refused to accept the status quo. He saw the dairy farms of Normandy, with their vats and churns. He saw the local hospital kitchens, with their bathtubs and bedpans. And an idea began to form. An idea so audacious, so unorthodox, it bordered on insane. If the miracle couldn't get to the front, what if they could brew the miracle at the front? The idea, when Major Fleischer first voiced it, was met with stunned silence. Then, predictable disbelief. His superiors, career logistics officers, saw 1,000 reasons why it was impossible. This wasn't home brewing beer in a barn. This was microbiology. It required sterile labs, precise temperature controls, and highly trained technicians. It was a delicate, industrial process. Proposing to do it in a war zone with scavenged parts? It was madness. But madness and innovation often look the same in the face of desperation. Fleischer wasn't just a pathologist. He was a leader with a rare gift for seeing potential where others saw only problems. He knew he needed a team of believers, or at least a team of resourceful men who loved a good challenge. His first recruit was Captain Robert Donnelly, an engineer from the Quartermaster Corps. Donnelly was a man who could fix a tank engine with a wrench and a prayer. A born problem solver who saw the world as a collection of parts waiting to be repurposed. When Fleischer laid out his plan, Donnelly didn't laugh. A slow grin spread across his face. The sheer, beautiful insanity of it appealed to him. Together, they drew up a list. It looked less like a laboratory inventory and more like a scavenger's treasure map. They needed a pressure cooker for sterilization and an autoclave. They needed large, shallow vessels for surface culture bedpans from a looted German medical supply depot. They needed a way to incubate the mold at a stable 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And most importantly, they needed a deep fermentation tank. Here, Donnelly became a master of the impossible. Imagine the scene. A U.S. Army Jeep bouncing to the Norman countryside past burned-out panzers and grazing cows. Fleischer and Donnelly pull into the courtyard of a dairy farm near the village of Vervax. The farmer, wary but curious, watches as the American engineer walks around his milkery, tapping on the large stainless steel churns used for making camembert cheese. Donnelly points to a 100-gallon vat. Perfect. It could be sealed, it could be sterilized, and with a few modifications, it could become the heart of their operation. The liberation of equipment became a legend among the support units. A generator was borrowed from a signal core detachment. Rubber tubing was siphoned from wrecked vehicles. An entire field laboratory was set up in the back rooms of a captured German barracks, chosen because its thick stone walls helped maintain a stable temperature. They built their own incubation chamber using scrap wood, blankets for insulation, and a series of low-wattage light bulbs for heat, all wired to a thermostat stripped from a German officer's abandoned field kitchen. Within days, this ragtag team of medics, engineers, and scroungers had assembled something miraculous. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a laboratory, a maze of pipes and repurposed containers, humming with the stolen power of a patched-up generator. They had built the factory, but they were missing the one thing they couldn't scavenge from a French farm or a German supply dump. Major Fleischer held the open thermos for a moment, his eyes scanning the surface of the agar jelly inside. The entire makeshift lab holds its breath. You could hear a pin drop over the hum of the generator. To the untrained eye, it would look like nothing a simple, yellowish gel. But Fleischer sees it, a faint, almost imperceptible web of gossamer threads, a delicate, velvety texture. The Penicillin culture is alive. A wave of relief, so profound it's almost dizzying, washes over the room. No one cheers. It's a quiet, sacred moment. The seed has arrived. Now, the real work begins. The process is a strange mix of high science and farm kitchen improvisation. Under the dim light, with the distant rumble of artillery as their soundtrack, Fleischer and Harlow become high-stakes chefs. They use sterilized ladles to scoop a corn-steeped liquor and lactose solution, a nutrient broth they have prepared from captured German supplies and local sugar beets, into each of the dozens of bedpans. Then, with the steady hand of the surgeon, Harlow uses a long, wire loop to transfer a tiny speck of the precious mold from the thermos onto the surface of the liquid in each bedpan. Each one becomes a miniature, open-air factory. They are covered with sterilized lids and placed carefully into the homemade incubation chamber. The final step is the most critical. The 100-gallon camembert, at the heart of the operation. The team pours the remaining nutrient broth into its cavernous belly. Then Fleischer himself takes the thermos and, with a reverence usually reserved for a holy sacrament, he carefully pours the rest of the live culture into the tank. He seals the lid, and Donnelly fires up a repurposed aquarium pump, forcing filtered air into mixture to encourage deep fermentation. Their monster is alive. Now comes the hardest part of all, the waiting. Biology works on its own schedule. It cannot be rushed by the urgency of war. The team knows it will take 5 to 7 days for the mold to grow, to produce the precious drops of metabolic byproduct that they will then have to painstakingly extract and purify. 5 to 7 days. An eternity. Just 10 miles away, that eternity is being measured in heartbeats. In the field hospitals, the number of postoperative infections is climbing at an alarming rate. Surgeons, bone-weary and emotionally shattered, are performing amputations on wounds that should have been simple to treat. They are signing death certificates for boys who survived the hell of Omaha Beach, only to be killed by a microscopic invader they couldn't see. Every medic knows the signs. The sweet, sickly smell of gas gangrene. The raging fevers that morphine can't touch. They pack the wounds with sulfa powder, a far inferior drug, but it's all they have. They watch helplessly as the red lines of infection creep up a young man's arm, a visible countdown to the end. They hear the delirious cries from mothers for water, for an end to the pain. Back in the lab, the team works in shifts, maintaining a 24-hour vigil. They are guardians of the process. They check the temperature gauges on the incubator every hour. They test the pH levels of the broth in the main tank. Their greatest fear is contamination. A single stray bacterium, a wild yeast spore floating in the air, could get into the system and ruin the entire batch, turn their miracle brew into a useless, cloudy soup. 3 days have passed. Then 4. The pressure is immense. Every morning, a runner arrives from the divisional surgeon's office. His message always the same. Anything yet, Major? And every morning, Fleischer has to give the same agonizing answer. Not yet. Soon. On the 5th day, Captain Donnelly, the engineer, is on watch. He's peering through a small glass porthole they had installed in the lid of the cheese vat. At first, he sees nothing but the dark, bubbling liquid. But then, under the beam of his flashlight, he catches a glimpse of it. Faint blue-green specks, suspended in the broth, swirling in the oxygenated current. He calls for Fleischer. The Major rushes over, his heart pounding. He looks, and a slow, triumphant smile spreads across his face. It's growing. Inside the bedpans, the surface of the liquid is now covered with a fine, velvety carpet of blue-green mold. Their impossible gamble, their Frankenstein's factory built from scrap and desperation, was working. They were brewing penicillin. But the real test was yet to come. Growing it was one thing. Harvesting, purifying, and proving it was potent enough to save a life, that was a final battle. And the clock was still ticking. Growing the mold was hard. Extracting it was suicide. There are no industrial centrifuges, no vacuum filters. There's only ingenuity and nerve. The team begins with the bedpans. They treat each one like a priceless artifact, carefully pouring the liquid broth, now rich with penicillin, through a makeshift filter crafted from layers of sterile gauze and charcoal. This crude method captures a liquid, separating it from a mat of mold. The resulting fluid is a murky, yellowish brown. It's a raw, impure penicillin broth. It's far too weak and full of metabolic waste to be injected into a human being. It had to be concentrated and purified. This is where the principles of high school chemistry meet the brutal reality of the battlefield. The team uses solvents like amyl acetate and chloroform, highly flammable, and scavenged from a captured German supply depot to separate the penicillin from the waste products. They work in a poorly ventilated room, with the constant risk of an accidental spark from the generator igniting the volatile fumes. It is incredibly dangerous, nerve-wracking work. Hour after hour, they perform a delicate liquid-to-liquid extraction, a process of mixing and separating again and again. Each step concentrates the potency of the drug, transforming the weak, brown broth into a smaller and smaller volume of clearer, golden liquid. 2 days, nonstop. Their reward? A few hundred milliliters of golden liquid. Enough for 50 men. Maybe. Enough for maybe 50 doses. It is a triumph, a miracle brewed in a bathtub and a cheese vat. But one final question remains, the most important one of all. Does it actually work? They can't risk injecting an unknown substance into a wounded soldier. It could be too weak. It could be toxic. They have to test it. Fleischer selects 24 lab mice part of the standard equipment in their field laboratory and injects each one with a lethal dose of streptococcus. The mice quickly sicken, their breathing becoming rapid, their bodies growing listless. They are dying. Then Fleischer divides them into 2 groups. A control group of 12 is left alone. The other 12 are each given a tiny injection of the Normandy penicillin. The team gathers around the cages, their faces illuminated by the dim light of a single bulb. The wait is agonizing. For hours, nothing happens. The sick mice in both groups look the same. A sense of doubt begins to creep into the room. Had they come all this way, risked so much, only to fail at the final hurdle? Then, around the 3rd hour, one of the treated mice begins to stir. It cleans its whiskers. A few minutes later, another starts to move around, looking for food. Within 6 hours, the difference is undeniable. The control group cage is still, all 12 mice having succumbed to the infection. But in the test group cage, the mice are alive. All of them. They are active, healthy, and seemingly completely recovered. A hushed, victorious cheer erupts in the lab. It worked. Their homemade, battlefield-brewed penicillin was just as potent as a factory-produced drug from back home. Major Fleischer immediately sent a runner to the nearest field hospital. The message is simple. We have it. Send us your worst cases. Airborne. He was barely 20 years old, not much older than 20. His leg, shredded by shrapnel from a mortar blast, is in the advanced stages of gas gangrene. The flesh is blackened and swollen, and the surgeons had scheduled him for an emergency amputation at dawn. His only chance of survival. He is delirious with a fever of 104. He is, by all accounts, a dying man. With the surgeons watching skeptical but desperate, Fleischer administers the first injection of the golden liquid. They give him a dose every 3 hours, all through the night. The team from the lab waits with the doctors, a silent vigil around the soldier's cot. By morning, something incredible had happened. The fever has broken. The angry, red lines of infection have started to recede. The terrible, sweet smell of the gangrene is less pronounced. The paratrooper is conscious, lucid for the first time in days. The amputation is canceled. They had saved his leg. They had saved his life. News of the miracle at Fervax spreads through the medical corps like wildfire. Soon, a steady stream of patients is being diverted to the makeshift clinic. From a few hundred milliliters, the team's production ramps up. Within 2 weeks, the cheese vat and the rows of bedpans are producing enough penicillin to treat over 2,000 wounded soldiers. Thousands of men who would have otherwise died or lost limbs to the invisible enemy are stabilized and sent back to England for recovery. It was a victory as important as any battle. It wasn't one with tanks or planes, but with ingenuity, courage, and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Major Fleischer, Captain Donnelly, Lieutenant Harlow, and their anonymous team of medics and engineers never received a medal for what they did. Their story was buried in classified after-action reports. They were the unsung, unknown heroes of D-Day. They saw a crisis, defied the odds, and in Forgotten Corner, Normandy, they built a miracle from scrap. It's a reminder that war isn't just turned by generals with maps. It's turned by quiet people, determined people, the ones who refuse to let the world run out of miracles, but by quiet, determined people who simply refuse to let the world run out of miracles. The greatest victories aren't always won on the battlefield. Sometimes they're brewed in a bathtub, in a forgotten corner of Normandy,